Speaker will be Philip Fuchs from National Taiwan Normal University, and will be presenting on kinematics and kinetics of barefoot, shot, and spiked sprinting during acceleration at maximum speed.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My talk will relate to something that we have heard in the keynote. Specifically, footwear may have different effects at different times during a sprint. And this talk will provide a little bit evidence about this phenomenon. Obviously, we all understand that sprinting and running is very important. It's integrated in a lot of activities, in many game sports, but also in track and field itself, in 100-meter sprinting, hurdles, long jump, and so on. It also contributes to the general motor development, so quite important, but it also comes with increased risks, loads, impacts, and stress on joints. So this is where footwear comes into play, because the shoes we wear may help to absorb shock and to transfer forces. So in this study that I present, I focused on 3 different conditions that are extremely different. Barefoot, one's running in normal running shoes, and then in spiked sprinting shoes. I chose these ones because they are extremely different in the 2 probably most frequently investigated footwear properties, cushioning and longitudinal bending stiffness. And for barefoot running, we see improved performance and also decreased injury occurrence in barefoot runners. Another study also showed that there are some transitional effects. So people who habitually run barefoot and then they change the condition, they are wearing their shoes, they keep some characteristics like reduced contact time, increased flight time, and altered foot strike patterns. In the spiked sprint condition, we observe some immediate positive effects that are increased sprint velocity, decreased range of motion in the metatarsophalangeal joint, and increased energy during the push-off. You all know probably very well that these characteristics relate to ground reaction forces. And indeed, it is very important to investigate them to understand the underlying mechanisms. But when it comes to accelerated sprinting over a longer distance, it is a little bit tricky because you are limited. You cannot do it on a treadmill, and you are limited in terms of number of force platforms that you have. So what research mainly did in the past was focusing either on sprint times or kinematics via video analysis and so on, or if investigating ground reaction forces at all, then very often like for a single steps with 1 or 2 platforms. So the purpose of this study was to investigate the effects of different footwear on sprint performances and kinetics during different stages of acceleration and also at maximum speed. We recruited 17 competitive male sprinters, allowing us to reach a statistical power of 80% to detect moderate to large effects. And the athletes conducted or performed a self-selected warm-up, followed by repeated 60-meter sprints 3 times in different conditions: barefoot, regular running shoes, and the spiked sprinting shoes. The sequence of the conditions was randomized. They all took place on the same day with 10 minutes break in between to avoid fatigue. Then we have had 54 force platforms underneath a sprint track to collect ground reaction force. And we had 3 timing gates at the start, the 30 meters mark, and the 60-meter finish. These were the following variables that we collected: sprint time and maximum speed as performance criteria, step length and frequency, as well as contact and flight time as spatiotemporal characteristics, braking and propulsive forces and impulses as our kinetic variables. After checking the assumptions, we conducted 2-way ANOVA with repeated measures. And not a part in the manuscript that I submitted, but I want to share some results, was that we afterwards performed statistical parametric mapping. So let's take a look first when we reached maximum speed. It was on average within the first 40 meters. This is important to keep in mind because it tells us that the distance of 50 meters was long enough to measure a number of steps during the maximum speed phase. And then the main effects, all of the tests for phases were significant. 17 out of 20 tests showed significant main effect of conditions, and 3 out of 9 interactions were found. So this is not the majority, but at least 1/3. So I think we should not ignore it. And especially to understand the interaction a little bit more, we can take a look into the main effect of condition and compare it between the two phases also. And interesting is what we see here, that the average effect sizes for kinetic variables have been larger than for spatiotemporal ones during the acceleration phase, and at maximum speed it was the opposite. So here we see main effect of footwear on performance. On the left y-axis for the sprint times, on the right side for maximum speed. The main effects were all significant. The post hoc shows us that these effects have been between the spiked condition and shot, and between spiked and barefoot, but not between shot and barefoot. However, I want to take a look at this example at maximum speed, because if we take these averages, we could wonder, okay, it's not statistically significant, but does it maybe matter in practical settings? If we take these averages and we assume a distance of 60 meters for maximum speed sprint section, the last 60 meters, then this alone leads to a difference in sprint time during this section alone of 0.06 seconds. And I guess that most competitive practitioners would not wish to ignore something like this. Here we see the statistical parametric mapping result. On the top you see the descriptive values of braking forces on the left and for propulsive forces on the right. At the bottom you see the results, the inferential results of the SPM itself. And the thing I want to stress here, very briefly, is the difference when effects occurred. So, for example, for the braking forces, we see that in the first 50% of the sprint, we observe this main effect, mainly. And for propulsive forces, it's quite different. In the first 20%, we see there is nothing going on. And then for the remaining 80%, we see effects which are mainly between the shot and the spike condition. So overall, this means we observed that footwear affected performance, kinetics, and spatiotemporal characteristics in both phases. And sprint time and maximum speed results showed us or indicated that barefoot may be superior over shot in some conditions, at least at maximum sprinting speed. The braking forces told us that barefoot sprinting, the braking forces were lower in barefoot sprinting than in spiked, and it was comparable for the propulsive forces, at least during the second half of the acceleration and at maximum speed then, which is associated with positive effects on performance overall. The interactions we observed, although it was only 1/3, but it tells us there is something going on which we should not ignore. And then in addition, with the comparison of footwear main effects between the different phases, this told us that effects are going on that depend on the phases. So they may vary between different stages of sprint that we are looking at. Then, especially in addition to the SPM results, if we take those into consideration, then we understand even more that effects depend on the acceleration, so it really matters where we are within the acceleration phase. And that means that it is probably not sufficient to investigate a single step and then conclude general things about footwear effects, for example. As we have heard before, it matters at what mark during the sprint we are. So this may be tricky if we don't have 54 force platforms, but luckily there are new approaches emerging, like OpenCap and so on, that may help us very well to develop our future research ideas. And in terms of practical application, it also means that we may want to rethink about how we refine footwear based on the sprint distance that we are facing in the competition, and also the footwear we select for our athletes and so on. We may select them specifically for the positions based on the distances that they usually have in the competition. So I hope that this gives you some inspiration, some new ideas how to direct future research or even practical application. Thank you very much.